When my husband passed away, I believed I had already touched the very bottom of sorrow, but the true suffering was only just starting. The evening after the burial, my daughter-in-law tossed my suitcases into the garage and said with a chill, "From now on, you'll be sleeping with the cat." I gave no reaction. I just nodded and gave a small smile. She had no clue that behind my quiet, I was holding a much bigger secret: the $21 million and the oceanfront villa my husband had left for me. That evening, in the cold damp of the garage, I promised myself I would rewrite the rules with the quiet resolve of a widow who had loved with all her heart and endured far too much. If you are still with me, please tell me where you are watching this from. Every comment you leave is another step with me on this journey. And if this story has found a place in your heart, don't forget to press like so it can reach others. My name is Eleanor Hayes, 62 years old. I had just laid to rest my husband of 45 years, Arthur Hayes. That morning, a soft mist fell over Westview Cemetery in Atlanta. Each droplet felt as cold as a pin against the damp clay. Dark umbrellas formed a circle around the flag-covered casket, while the low sound of a hymn played somewhere in the distance. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of roses, wet earth, and grief. I stood there clutching my shawl, trying to find a balance between my sorrow and a strange, hollow feeling. People often say that after death, love is all that is left. But that day, I saw that love isn't the only thing that survives. So do greed and hypocrisy. My son David sat quietly in the front row, his eyes puffy and red. My daughter-in-law Melinda was different. She did not weep. She didn't shake like someone grieving a loss. Instead, she watched, her gaze moving from one guest to the next, as if she were taking inventory and calculating who might be useful down the line. When I saw that look, I knew right away this was not grief. This was the start of a strategy. As the pastor praised Arthur's kindness and commitment to his family, I saw Melinda's jaw clench. Beneath her dark veil, her eyes were as cold as glass. A chill went down my back, not from the weather, but from the realization that she had been waiting for this moment, waiting for my husband to be lowered into the ground so she could start dividing up what was left. When the service ended, people drifted away one by one, leaving only white roses trembling in the mist. I leaned over the casket, placed my hand on it, and whispered, "Rest well, Arthur. I will be all right. I promise." I had no idea that only a few hours later, that promise would become a vow to reclaim justice for myself. The black sedan moved slowly through the familiar streets of Atlanta. I sat in the back, watching the tall buildings blur behind a sheet of rain. The whole city seemed to be trapped under glass, cold and far away. The seat next to me was empty, the place where Arthur used to sit when he drove me to church or to community dinners. Now it was just me, the empty space of the leather seat and the pointless hum of warm air from the vent. In the front, Melinda drove, her long dark red nails tapping a fast rhythm on the steering wheel. Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror now and then, without a single drop of sympathy. David sat beside her, clutching his phone, as if one wrong move would make it all shatter. No one said a word for the whole ride home. When the car turned onto the long driveway, lined with old oaks, leading to our two-story home in Buckhead, where Arthur and I had lived for over 30 years, my chest tightened. That house once was full of laughter, the smell of pound cake and gospel music every Sunday afternoon. Now it felt empty, a field of battle instead of a sanctuary. When the car stopped, I opened the door and froze. My 3 blue suitcases, the ones I'd packed just to stay at David's house for a few days after the service, were already sitting by the garage in the rain. A fine layer of grime covered them, as if they'd been put out there hours ago. I looked up at Melinda standing on the porch, her arms crossed. "What is this?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the long day. She shrugged, a small cold smirk on her face. "Oh, I figured you understood. Now that Arthur's gone, Things are going to have to change." Her tone was airy, but every word hit like a stone. David stood behind her, staring at his feet. "Son," I said, my voice low, "what is your wife talking about?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's just for now, Mom. We just need to rearrange things." Before I could answer, Melinda stepped forward, pulled the garage door open, and said clearly, "You can stay in here. The room next to the cat's space is empty." Then she turned her back on me, as if she had just finished some simple chore, and went inside. Her heels clicked hard against the floor, a sharp sound that echoed in the rain. I stood still for a moment, letting the shaking in my hands stop. The rain continued to fall and the drops ran down my face, mixing with my tears. I couldn't tell where one started and the other stopped. I bent down, grabbed my suitcases, and pulled them into the corner of the garage, a small, tight space where Arthur used to keep his gardening tools. The walls were stained and damp. The air smelled of mildew and oil, and the one small window looked out at the iron fence behind the house. It was not a place for a mother-in-law, let alone the woman who had built this family right alongside Arthur. But I did not cry again. I just let out a long breath and sat on the edge of the old folding cot Melinda had left for me. On the small crate beside it sat a half-eaten bag of cat food. A faint smile touched my lips, not because I found any of it funny, but because I understood something vital. I had just been placed on the first square of a game whose rules only I knew. That night, I could not sleep. The rain tapped on the metal roof like a clock counting down the time. I sat in the dark, playing back every moment of my life. Arthur, the steady and careful man he was, had always told me, "Ellie, when they think you are weak, let them. The right kind of silence is your greatest strength." I never dreamed I would need that advice, but tonight I knew the time had come. Because no one knew that before Arthur passed, he had quietly set up everything. The accounts, the investments, even the Azure Bay Villa in St. Lucia. Everything was solely in my name. The total value, $21 million. I was the only one who knew the passcodes, the only one who held the keys. And Melinda. She thought I was just a heartbroken old woman living off her son's charity. I smiled, the same smile Arthur once called the smile of someone who already knows how the story is going to end. When morning came, I was still sitting by the small window in the garage, watching the first light hit the wet pavement. I heard Melinda moving around upstairs, the clatter of plates, the smell of coffee drifting down. She was living in the high of her victory, and I was simply waiting for the first card to be played. I knew just what to do. Be quiet. Watch. Remember. And when the time was right, I would remind them who really owned this house. Later that morning, David came into the garage before he left for work. He stood in the doorway, then said quietly, "I'm sorry, Mom. She's under a lot of stress. It'll be fine." I looked at my son, the same boy who cried in my arms when his first pet hamster died at age 9, and I realized he'd been swallowed up by his fear of a fight. "It's all right, David," I said gently. "I know my place." The door closed. The sound of his car faded. I looked around the cold room, my fingers touching the locket Arthur had given me. A draft slipped under the door, carrying the damp smell of gasoline. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "All right, Eleanor, let's begin." That evening, while Melinda and David ate in the large dining room, I heard their laughter from below. I was not jealous, and I was not angry. I just sat there in the dark, writing my plan, step by step, in a small notebook. Observe. Note every habit. Find the weak spots. Wait. Because in any war, the quiet ones are always the most dangerous. And in that house, where I'd been demoted to living beside the cat, I knew the biggest battle of my life was just starting. I used to believe there wasn't a room in that house that could feel foreign to me, until I stepped into the one they said I would be in for a while. A small, damp room with one high, narrow window that looked out onto the recycling bins. The walls were peeling, the ceiling had water stains, and the concrete floor felt like a block of ice. In the center was a rusty cot tilted to one side, its mattress thin and sagging. Next to the wall was a low shelf holding a few cans of cat food and a lamp with no shade. I set my suitcases down and forced the window open an inch. The air brought in the smell of wet leaves and garbage. Outside, the backyard light cast a weak yellow glow. Upstairs, I heard Melinda's voice float down. "You should just be grateful we're letting you stay. This is not a charity." Her words landed like tiny pricks. I didn't answer. When Arthur was alive, this space had been his workshop. He used to joke and call it his headquarters. Now it was my bedroom, where I had to learn to breathe quietly so no one would be bothered by me. The first morning of my new life started earlier than I was used to. At 6 a.m., when the cat meowed, Melinda was already at the door, holding her cup of coffee. "You can handle breakfast," she said, not asking, as if giving an order. "I have a meeting at 8. She didn't wait for me to reply, just glanced around the room and walked away. I changed into an old house dress, tied a scarf around my head, and went upstairs. The cold from the kitchen tile went right through my slippers. On the counter, everything was already laid out. Eggs, sausage, flour, berries, and a note in her sharp handwriting. "Omelet for David. The children like waffles. I'll just have fruit and yogurt." The word "I" was underlined twice, as if she had to mark her territory. I turned on the stove, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from memory. Back then, Arthur always made the coffee. He loved his old percolator, and I'd watch him butter toast while telling me stories about his week. Now, I was in the same kitchen, but every bit of warmth had been scrubbed away. When I brought the food to the table, David came downstairs. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. He looked exhausted. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, giving me a fast kiss on the cheek that felt like an obligation. I smiled. "Did you rest well?" "Sort of." He glanced around and added, "Don't take it to heart. Melinda is just stressed." "I understand," I said softly. The truth was, I understood more than he knew. He was caught between his duty and his fear. Melinda knew just how to make a man feel guilty for just breathing wrong. When everyone sat down, I stayed by the counter. Melinda looked up, her tone smooth but cold. "You can clear the plates when we're done. And don't forget to feed the cat." "No, please, no, thank you." David sipped his coffee, staring at his phone. Their children, Ava and Leo, glanced at me, unsure. I gave them a gentle smile. Ava looked down, while Leo tried to smile back. After they left, the house was silent. I stood alone in the kitchen. The only sound was the clock ticking. I washed the dishes, wiped the counters, and folded the dish towels. Each movement was a ritual of endurance. By noon, I was hanging laundry in the backyard. The heat carried the scent of soap. I looked toward the great oak tree Arthur had planted when David was born. It was taller than the roof now, its branches spreading wide. I remembered his hand, his deep laugh when he said, "This tree will give you shade one day, Ellie. When you're old, all you'll need is a seat beneath it." Now, I was old, sitting under that same tree, but there was no one sitting with me. In the afternoon, Ava and Leo came home from school. I made them oatmeal cookies just like I used to. Ava hesitated, looking at the plate. "Grandma." Mom said, "You don't have to do that anymore." She said, "You should be resting." I smiled. "I like doing it. Go on. They're still warm." The girl glanced over her shoulder, then picked one up and took a tiny bite. Her face lit up. Leo hurried over, grabbed two, and shoved them into his pocket. "Don't tell your mom," I whispered with a wink. They nodded, then ran upstairs. I watched them go, my heart aching, but warm. At least there were two souls in this house who hadn't been taught that kindness was a sign of weakness. Around 6 p.m., Melinda came home. She walked right into the living room, dropped her briefcase, and started a video call on her phone. Her voice changed from cold to syrupy sweet in a second. I heard her laugh. Lord, I am exhausted, but it really helps having a free housemate around. A woman's laughter came from the phone. I froze, the dish rag slipping from my hand. I wanted to walk out there and say that the free maid was the woman who signed the down payment check that bought this very house. But I didn't. I just bent down, picked up the rag, folded it, and kept wiping the same spot. She thought I couldn't hear her. I let her think that. When night came, I sat in my small room, lit only by the weak yellow lamp. The sound of the TV drifted down from upstairs. Laughter, the clink of forks on plates, the children bickering over a show. I didn't feel angry, just an emptiness settling quietly inside me. I opened the small leather notebook Arthur had given me for our 40th anniversary. The cover was worn, still smelling faintly of old paper. I wrote on the first page, Day 1. No one remembers who I was. They think I have lost my value, but I won't remind them. I will let them find out for themselves. Then I started noting every detail. Melinda home at 5:47 p.m. Her coat smells of expensive perfume. David arrived later, 5:52, looks tired, avoids any conflict. Ava and Leo ate at 6:10. Melinda on the phone with someone, laughing loud. At 7:35, she locked the master bedroom door. The lines looked dry, but to me, each one was a piece of a map that would lead to the truth. Late that night, I sat listening to the rain. The damp air crept in through the cracks, cold on my skin. I pulled the thin blanket up. The streetlight outside cast my shadow on the wall. An old, small woman, sitting alone in the dark. Invisible, unwanted, forgotten. I smiled a small smile. Just a flicker. I was no longer Eleanor Hayes, wife of Arthur Hayes, mistress of the Buckhead house. I was the woman pushed to the bottom floor of the home I helped buy. But from this low place, I would watch, I would learn, and I would prepare for my return. When the clock got near midnight, I closed the notebook and put it under my pillow. The ceiling glowed faintly from a car's headlights. I thought of something Arthur once said at our last anniversary dinner. If one day you find yourself at the bottom, Ellie, remember the ground is solid. It will help you push back up. In the darkness, I whispered, Thank you, Arthur. I still remember how to rise. Outside, the rain had stopped. The wind moved through the cracks. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. Tomorrow, I would keep cleaning the floors, washing their clothes, and making coffee at 7 a.m. sharp, just as they expected me to. Because only by pretending to be who they thought I was could I stay long enough to see what I needed to see. And when the time came, I would be the only one who knew how to turn this game around. Each morning started the same. The coffee maker humming upstairs and Melinda's heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The clock in the garage read 5:30 a.m. I woke before the alarm, just from habit. The room was cold, heavy with the smell of mildew. I put on an old sweater, tied my hair back, and stepped into the hall. Outside, the dawn was still a dim gray. The neighbor's porch light cast a pale glow through my window, stretching my shadow long across the floor. I climbed the stairs and opened the kitchen door. Everything looked perfect, just how Melinda liked it. Shining granite counters, utensils in perfect rows, and the placemat straightened without a single wrinkle. I started my routine. The unpaid help. Omelet for David, waffles for the children, fruit and yogurt for Melinda. She was afraid of gaining weight, but she never missed her morning latte with extra whipped cream. I cooked, I served, and I cleaned, all on the schedule she'd taped to the refrigerator. Every task had to be done by the minute. If breakfast was 5 minutes late, Melinda would purse her lips and say, You really need to manage your time better. David usually came down around 6:50, tie already knotted, cologne fresh. "Morning, Mom," he'd say, not looking up from his phone. I'd smile. "Scrambled or fried today?" "The usual. Thanks, Mom," he'd answer, eyes still on the screen. Melinda was always last, with that look of being terribly busy. "Press my blue dress, please. I have a presentation at the club." She wouldn't even look at me, just poured her coffee and sat with her magazine. "And clean my beige heels. There's a scuff mark on the side." "No, please. No, thank you." Her voice was light, like someone giving orders to an employee. David rarely stayed home after breakfast. He'd leave behind his plate and a quick, "I've got to get to the office." The door would close, and his car would pull away. I'd hear Melinda pacing the house, her heels tapping. She was on the phone, half whispering, half laughing. "I looked into a nursing home in Charlotte. The cost is so much cheaper than keeping her here." "No, David doesn't need to know. Men are simple. Just say financial benefit and they'll agree." I stood in the hallway, holding a damp cloth. Each word dripped into my ear like acid, slow and hot. A nursing home. Cheaper. Those two words echoed. I understood right then. To Melinda, I was no longer her husband's mother. I was an expense. One she was in a hurry to get rid of. At noon, I ate a piece of dry toast in my room. The old air conditioner upstairs rattled. I opened my notebook and added a new line. Day 7. Melinda researching nursing homes in Charlotte. I wasn't angry. I was just calm. Unsettlingly calm. Anger clouds your judgment, and I needed my mind to be clear. That afternoon, I went upstairs to iron. In Melinda's dressing room, the air was thick with perfume and the smell of new clothes. Her closet doors were open, rows of dresses, shoes, and bags, all arranged by color. I ironed each piece carefully. On her vanity table, a credit card statement was lying open. I didn't mean to look, but the bold letters caught my eye. Spa Elysian, fussed $400. Another page. Yoga Retreat, Asheville, $3,800. I frowned. David had told me just last week that his company was cutting back, and yet Melinda had just bought a new Chanel bag. I didn't touch anything. I just made a note. That afternoon, when Ava and Leo came home, I was folding laundry. Ava came up holding her sketchbook. "Grandma, why don't you go back to your own house? Mom doesn't seem to like you here." I smiled and stroked her hair. "I'm saving money, sweetie. It's easier to take care of you two this way." Ava tilted her head. "But Grandma, you don't need to save. Dad said you have savings." I smiled gently. "Did he?" "Well, sometimes adults save things not to spend them, but to wait for the right time." She nodded, not quite understanding, but she went quiet. Leo ran up, waving a paper. "Look, Grandma, I got an A on my history paper." I hugged him, feeling my heart soften. In this cold house, these two children were the only warmth I had. That evening, David came home late. His tie was loose. "Have you eaten?" I asked. "Not yet, but don't worry. Melinda said she's ordering takeout." I just nodded. As he climbed the stairs, I heard Melinda's voice from the living room. "I told you, the cost of keeping your mom here is more than I thought. If we move her to a facility, we can sell the house in Savannah. Doesn't that just make more sense?" David was quiet for a long time. Then he mumbled, "Melinda, Mom's still healthy. It's not time for that." "You're always so soft," she scoffed. "By the time you realize it, all the money will be gone." I stood in the shadows of the staircase, listening. I didn't interrupt. I had learned that silence, when used right, is worth more than 1,000 arguments. After dinner, when they were all asleep, I cleaned the kitchen. The house was so quiet. I washed each glass, dried it, and put it neatly on the shelf. The reflection on the cold marble counter shined under the light. I opened the drawer and took out my leather notebook. My pen moved slowly. Day 8. Spa and yoga bills don't add up. David seems unaware. Melinda mentioned selling the Savannah house. On the next page, I wrote 3 words. Start tracking everything. I wasn't a master of technology, but Arthur had taught me how to use online banking and manage our records. His old office still had the desktop computer and the old ledgers. I knew the password. Every night, once the house was asleep, I went upstairs. The pale blue light from the screen lit my face. I checked the joint bank account. David and Melinda shared the one Arthur had helped them open for their first house. After a few searches, I found a strange pattern. Regular cash withdrawals every month. Sometimes a few thousand, sometimes more than $10,000. The recipient was a company called Noble Ventures LLC. I looked it up. No office, no employees, just a P.O. box address in Charlotte. I sat there for a long time. The smell of cold coffee filled the room. Then I turned off the computer, closed the door, and went back down to the garage. Before I went to sleep, I wrote in my notebook, "The numbers are wrong. Money is disappearing. Need to confirm. Say nothing to David." I set the pen down and looked around the small room. The streetlight outside cast a line across the peeling wall. I lay down, listening to the sounds outside. I knew they wanted me out of this house, but what they didn't understand was this. When a woman has lost everything else, her dignity is the last thing she will fight for. And I, Eleanor Hayes, had just begun my battle. Not with shouting, but with a pen and a deadly silence. I waited until Melinda and David left the house before I picked up the phone. The air in the kitchen that morning felt heavy, as if someone had sealed all the doors and forgotten to leave a way out. On the table, a cup of cold coffee sat. I looked out the window at the oak garden, bathed in the early May sun. The leaves were full, though no one cared to notice. I took a deep breath and dialed. The man's voice on the other end made my hands shake, just a little. "Pierce Law Office? This is Marcus speaking." "Marcus, it's me, Eleanor Hayes." A pause, then his voice softened, warm. "Mrs. Hayes, I have been waiting for your call. When can you come in? There are a few things you need to see." I checked the clock. Only 8:40 a.m. Melinda had already left for her meeting. David was at his office. "I'll be there in an hour," I said, and hung up. I changed into a simple cream-colored dress, tied my hair back, and picked up my small handbag. Before leaving, I opened the bottom drawer, took out my leather notebook, a pen, and the old key Arthur once used for his private safe. Holding them felt like holding the last piece of my old self. The drive to Pierce and Associates wasn't long. Morning traffic filled Atlanta. The sunlight flickered through the windshield. It felt strange. Once, I had been the woman sitting in the passenger seat next to Arthur, listening to him talk about the markets. Now I was driving alone, in complete silence. Marcus's office was in an old brick building in Midtown. A brass nameplate shined in the sun. He greeted me at the door, the same calm man as always. Gray suit, blue tie, and the kind smile of a man who'd worked with Arthur for nearly 20 years. "Eleanor," he said, shaking my hand. "It's good to see you. My condolences once more." I nodded. "Thank you, Marcus. But I didn't come here today to grieve." He nodded and led me into the conference room. It was bright, with paintings of landscapes on the walls, a polished mahogany table, and the faint smell of paper and tea. On the table sat a thick file in a blue cover, labeled Assets and Trust of Arthur Hayes. Marcus opened the file, his voice slow and precise. "Arthur set up a secured asset trust. It secures full ownership for you, the beneficiary. This Buckhead estate, the Azure Bay Villa in St. Lucia. All stocks, bonds, and investment accounts are in your name. Not co-owned, entirely yours." I sat perfectly still. My ears were ringing. Marcus slid over another stack of papers with that familiar signature at the bottom. Arthur's hand, firm and steady, just like when he signed our anniversary cards. I read slowly, line by line, until I saw the handwritten note at the end. Make sure Ellie never has to depend on anyone. Not ever. I set the papers down. My hands were shaking. A sob escaped before I could stop it. Marcus gently handed me a tissue. He prepared these over a year ago, after he had that heart scare. He told me, "I'm not afraid of dying, Marcus. I'm afraid Ellie might have to ask someone's permission to live in her own home." I couldn't speak. I just felt the pain spreading through me, mixed with a strange warmth, as if Arthur were still sitting right there, holding my hand. Marcus continued, "The current estimated total is $21 million. That includes the Buckhead property, the Azure Bay Villa, a portfolio of tech stocks, government bonds, and retirement accounts. All sealed under your name." I swallowed. "And David?" "He has a portion, but at a support level. Arthur used to say, if David has a good head on his shoulders, he'll build his own wealth. If not, giving him too much will only ruin him." I laughed through my tears. That was exactly Arthur. Practical, blunt, and full of love. Marcus folded his hands. "Eleanor, I know you are under pressure. My advice is, do not let anyone know about this, especially not Melinda. Keep everything as it is. When the time is right, I will guide you." I nodded. "I understand. Thank you, Marcus. Truly." "Arthur said you were the only person he trusted to use money the right way." He smiled softly. And I believe he was right. Outside the office, I stood on the steps for a long time. The wind tugged at my shawl. Sunlight slanted across the street. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Tears were still on my cheeks, but I didn't feel cold inside anymore. People say money can't buy happiness. Maybe not, but it can buy you the freedom to choose how you are treated. On the way home, I stopped at a small cafe. I ordered a cappuccino, the drink Arthur always ordered for me every Sunday. While I waited, I opened my phone, created a new email account with a password that was 16 characters long, and set up automatic backups for the files Marcus had sent. Each step was careful, as if I were rebuilding a fortress. When I got home, Melinda was already there. She was on the sofa, on a call, her voice strangely sweet. "Yes, I can move the money by the weekend. Just make sure everything's finalized before next month. All right?" I walked lightly through the living room, keeping my face calm. Melinda glanced at me and said one last thing into the phone. "Okay, we'll talk later." Then she hung up and smiled. "Oh, you're back. I was just about to ask you for a little favor." That evening, I cooked a simple dinner. David looked worn out, while Melinda talked nonstop about a real estate investment in Charlotte. Her eyes were bright. "My partner and I are looking at a new project. If it goes well, with just $50,000 down, the return could double in 6 months." I sliced the roast and smiled. "Sounds promising. Have you checked the legal side?" She paused, then forced a laugh. "Of course. I'm not stupid." David mumbled something, clearly not in on the plan. I sat quietly and listened, adding more vegetables to Ava's plate while I calculated. If Melinda really moved that money, I could track it. But not tonight. Tonight, I just needed to be quiet. Night fell. The house went dark. I lay on the old cot, my laptop screen lit. I saved all of Marcus's documents to a secure drive, then printed copies to store in the small safe Arthur left. I changed my bank passwords, activated two-factor authentication, and created a hidden account. Each keystroke felt like a steady heartbeat, not fear, just cold clarity. Upstairs, Melinda laughed loudly in the master bedroom. Her voice echoed through the floor. David was quiet, as always. I closed the laptop and smiled to myself. She thought she was living in her moment of victory, that I was just a forgetful old woman waiting to be put out. She didn't know the game had already started, and the first move was mine. I closed my leather notebook, set it by my pillow, and turned off the light. In the dark, I heard the wind in the oak trees outside, soft but persistent, like Arthur's voice drifting back. Ellie, when you know the truth, don't be afraid. Use it like a light. I shut my eyes and answered silently. Yes, my love. The light is back. And this time, it will shine right on the ones who think they're safe in the dark. I've always believed the best liars trip up on the smallest details, like the perfume they wear for an afternoon yoga class. That morning, Melinda carried a sleek black bag, wore tight leggings, but had on full TV-ready makeup. Dark red lips, shimmery gold eyelids, and a perfume so strong it cut right through the smell of coffee. I didn't ask. I stood at the sink washing dishes, watching her reflection in the window. David, she said sweetly, have lunch with your client, okay? I've got yoga downtown and might be home late. He just mumbled an, okay. Not a hint of suspicion. The garage door shut. The car engine faded. I checked the clock. 9:52 a.m. She said, yoga downtown. But I knew there were black high heels in her trunk, the kind no one wears to yoga. I dried my hands and grabbed my purse. Inside was just one thing that mattered. Arthur's old phone, which I'd set up to record video. Late morning, Atlanta was bright with the Sunday sun. I called a cab and told the driver to follow the pearl-white Lexus ahead. The driver, an older man, glanced at me in the mirror and smiled a little. People only follow someone when deep down they already know what they're going to find. You know that, right? I answered softly, I do. And I'm ready. We turned down brick-paved streets and stopped at the Sovereign Hotel, an upscale spot downtown where people go to close deals or have affairs. Sometimes both. I asked the driver to wait, then stepped out. The hot wind carried the smell of asphalt and a trace of expensive perfume from the lobby. I stood a few yards from the door, sunglasses on, watching. In under 5 minutes, Melinda stepped out of her car, heels clicking in the sun, a fitted green silk dress, her hair softly curled, and a smile I'd never seen at home. She walked straight inside. I followed at a safe distance. The lobby smelled of polished wood and white lilies. In the corner near the bar sat Julian Vance. I recognized him from a broker profile. Young, tall, slicked back hair, and the polished grin of a man selling dreams. Melinda sat across from him. They touched hands across the table, and he slid a thick brown envelope toward her. I paused near a large potted plant, pulled out the phone, and pressed the screen. The camera started rolling. They talked for about 15 minutes. I couldn't hear every word, but her face said it all. Whatever they were agreeing on had nothing to do with yoga. At the end, Julian took her hand and kissed her wrist. Melinda giggled, tilting her head. I had enough. When she stood to leave, I slipped back toward the exit and blended into the crowd. On the ride home, I watched the recording. Melinda's face was clear, her eyes proud, a thick envelope in her hand, her lips saying something that made Julian laugh. I scrubbed through and zoomed in. She touched his suit, a silent promise. I saved the video twice, once on the phone, once to a private cloud. By late afternoon, the sky looked like rain. David got home earlier than usual, his shirt damp. Melinda was already there, hair up, in her workout clothes, a towel around her neck. She stood at the mirror, her voice soft. You know, yoga was so packed today, but I feel so much lighter. I should go more often. David smiled, believing her. I'm glad you could unwind. I walked by and set a tray on the table. Melinda's eyes slid over me, cold as ice, but she kept smiling. Eleanor, could you make me a cup of herbal tea? I need to detox. Of course, I said. With perfume that strong today, I think you really do need a detox. She froze for just a second, then laughed a little too brightly. You're always so direct. I carried the tray away, feeling oddly calm. That line was a small blade I'd thrown just to see how she'd react, and in that smile, she'd let a shiver show. That night, the house was quiet. Around 11 p.m., I heard Melinda's heels clicking down the hall and stopping in the living room. I held my breath. She didn't realize the glow from her laptop was leaking through the cracked door, the kind of light that gives away secrets. When she went upstairs, I waited 10 more minutes. Then I stepped out, silent as a shadow. The laptop was still open. No password. I sat, my heart pounding, but my hands were steady. The screen showed an open inbox. The top subject line read, "Divorce paperwork nearly finished, just waiting on the estate confirmation." When I read that line, "Divorce paperwork nearly finished, just waiting on the estate confirmation," my heart didn't hurt. It just went cold. Cold like love had never lived here. And you, if you were in my place, what would you do after learning someone in your home was waiting to sign a verdict of betrayal? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know whether your heart would choose silence or a fight. Below it, the sender's name. David Carrera, personal attorney. I scrolled slowly and read each line. Once the asset transfer is complete, you can proceed with the divorce without legal obstacles. As agreed, the portion in your husband's name can be moved through the shell company established in Charlotte. Make sure the mother-in-law doesn't interfere. D. I felt my heart go still, like a lake before a storm. It wasn't anger anymore. It was absolute clarity. She didn't just want to humiliate me. She was planning to steal David's entire life. And if she succeeded, she would take every asset she thought belonged to his family. I took out my phone, switched it to silent, and photographed every page of the email. Then I plugged in a small USB drive, the kind Arthur used for contracts, and copied all the data. Time crawled. Each click of the mouse sounded like a gavel in the silent room. When it finished, I pulled the USB, cleared the history, and shut the laptop. I stood and listened. Upstairs, Melinda laughed, that hollow laugh of someone who thinks she's hidden everything. I went back to my small room under the garage. The streetlight spilled across the wall. One half of me was the humiliated woman, the other half was the one who had just taken back the power. I opened my own laptop and created a new folder named Magnolia, the name Arthur used in his letters. Ellie, you're a magnolia, rising from the mud but never stained. I saved all the data there, then sent a copy to the secret email account only I knew. Another copy went to Marcus Pierce. No message, just the subject line. Keep this for me, in case it's needed. Done. I leaned back. Rain tapped on the garage roof. I smiled slightly. In the dark, I stared at the ceiling and thought of Arthur, the man who told me, "Never hand your fate to someone who can't keep their word." I hadn't listened, but now I had. Melinda thought she was the hunter, but every hunter is being hunted. She thought she was about to slip out of the cage, not knowing she'd already stepped into the trap I was setting. I closed the laptop and turned off the light. A faint smile touched my lips. Not the smile of a victor, but of someone who was finally awake. It rained all night in Atlanta, but I didn't feel cold, because I knew, from this moment on, the power in this house no longer belonged to Melinda. That morning, I heard the office door upstairs creak open. The soft scrape of metal on wood made me flinch. David rarely went into that room. Since Arthur passed, the door had stayed shut, gathering dust. I was making coffee in the kitchen when I heard him call, his voice shocked. "Mom! Mom! Come up here a second." The sound made me look up. For months, David had never used that tone. The voice of a son staring at something he couldn't process. I dried my hands and climbed the stairs, my heart racing, though my face was calm. The office door was wide open. Morning light poured in, washing over the oak desk. David stood there, holding a stack of yellowed papers. I recognized them at once. Arthur's original will. The desk drawer had been pulled out. Papers were scattered, but that file lay on the wood, as if Arthur himself had just put it down. David looked at me, his eyes wide, confused, and wounded. "Mom, this house. It's yours." I stepped closer, tracing the familiar slant of Arthur's firm handwriting. I said quietly, "Yes. Your father wanted to protect me. He was afraid I'd be hurt if everything fell into the wrong hands." David said nothing. He clutched the papers, as if the weight of the truth had just landed on him. At that moment, Melinda appeared at the door. Her eyes were sharp, lipstick bright red. "What is that? What are you holding, David?" He didn't hide it in time. He turned and stammered. It's Dad's will." Melinda strode forward and snatched the document. Her eyes flew across the lines. Then she screamed, "No, you hid this. You pretended to be poor to manipulate us." I straightened, set my coffee cup down, and met her gaze with a look I knew she'd never seen. "Manipulate? No, Melinda. I stayed silent to see what you would do when you thought you had all the power." She laughed, a harsh sound. "Oh, that's good. You expect us to believe you were observing while you let me cook, clean, and take care of you like a maid?" I raised an eyebrow and said nothing. David cut in, his voice shaking. "Melinda, that's enough." "Enough," she snapped at him. "How naive are you, David? She played the victim to make you feel guilty, and now she claims this house is hers. Can't you see she's laughing at us?" I calmly opened my purse and took out an envelope. Inside were photos of Melinda at the Sovereign Hotel, laughing with Julian Vance, envelope in hand. Sunlight hit the desk as I laid them down beside the will. Then I added the printed emails. "Maybe," I said, my voice even, "you should read these before you tell another lie." Silence filled the office. Only the clock ticked. Melinda held the photos, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. You followed me?" "No," I said. "I went to your yoga class. Turns out that's where people sign divorce paperwork and divide assets." David was frozen. When he read the last line of the email, his face went white. He looked at his wife, his voice choked. "Melinda, divorce paperwork nearly finished, waiting on the estate confirmation." "What does that mean?" She set the papers down and tried to steady herself. "You don't understand. It's a financial plan." "It's betrayal," I cut in, my voice level. "Betrayal of the husband who trusted you and the mother you treated like a burden." Melinda stepped back, her face flushed with anger. "You have no right. You deceived us. You pretended to be broke to test us. What are you trying to prove?" I looked straight into her eyes, then at David. His head bowed. "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said, my voice low. "I simply let you show who you really are." David's hands shook. He set the papers on the desk and whispered, "I've been so stupid." "No," I said softly. "You've just been silent too long, and silence, David, can be crueler than any action." He lifted his head, his eyes wet. "Mom, I'm sorry." I shook my head. "Don't say it. Just look at how you stayed silent and understand why they felt free to treat your mother like that." The room went quiet again. Only Melinda's ragged breathing broke the air. She stepped back, then suddenly screamed, "This old woman tricked us! You're no better than a liar!" I smiled slightly. "No, Melinda, I didn't trick anyone. I was patient, and I let everyone reveal their own nature." I sat in Arthur's old chair, my hand on the desk. Here, for years, I'd sat beside my husband. Today, I sat alone, but I was no longer the woman pushed into the garage. David sank into the chair across from me, his head bowed. Melinda stood by the wall, breathing hard. I opened the drawer and set a small key on the desk. The safe key. Inside are all the documents for the assets, the accounts, and the villa in St. Lucia. And this, I looked straight at Melinda, is evidence of everything you've done. If I choose, one phone call sends it all to my attorney. Melinda stiffened, then laughed bitterly. "You think you've won?" I stood and adjusted my collar. The morning light caught my face. "No, Melinda, I haven't won. I've simply taken back the place I never should have lost." David left first, without a word. It was just me and her. Melinda leaned against the wall, her hands shaking. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think you were weak. Turns out you were just waiting for the right moment to twist the knife." I looked at her calmly. "No, Melinda. I didn't stab anyone. I simply stopped letting people step on me." She swallowed, turned, and hurried out. The door slammed. I sat down and looked around the room. Everything was the same, except for how I felt. A chapter was closed. No noise, just the truth, shattered open. That afternoon, I put Arthur's desk in order. In the drawer, his old fountain pen was still there. I lifted it, wiped it clean, and placed it in its case. On the shelf, the family photo was still there. Me, Arthur, David, the 2 grandkids, and Melinda. I took the frame down, slid out the glass, and removed the picture. Then I carefully cut it in half. The right side, where Melinda stood, I folded and placed in a separate envelope, locking it in the cabinet. I didn't hate her. Hate is a burden. I simply remembered. Because memory is the strongest evidence of justice. As the afternoon light spilled across the floor, I knew that from this moment on, I was back in my rightful place as the lady of this house. And this time, I would never let anyone push me to the lowest floor again. The next noon, Atlanta's sky hung low and gray, heavy with an oncoming storm. The house felt weighted, as if everything inside were bracing for what was to come. I sat in the living room sorting Marcus's documents when a door upstairs slammed hard, furious. David came down, pale, his fists clenched. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking, but firm. "I can't take this anymore." I looked at him and didn't ask. He swallowed and continued. "I read everything. I saw the emails, the photos. I know you're not making this up, and I know I've stayed silent for far too long." I laid a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "It's all right, David. I knew this day would come." He drew a breath and shouted, "Melinda, come down here." His voice tore through the house, slicing down the stairs. I heard a door fly open and the sharp clicks of high heels on the wood floor. Melinda descended, wearing a bright red dress, her face like ice. "What are you yelling about?" she snapped. "Get out of this house," David said, each word thrown. Melinda laughed, not hurt, but full of contempt. "Get out of this house? What on earth are you talking about, David?" She tilted her head, mocking him. "This house was never yours. Look around. Everything here is because of me. You just go to work and sit. Without me, this place would look worse than that garage your mother lives in." David clenched his fists, his lips trembling, but he didn't answer. I stood up and stepped between them. "Melinda," I said softly but firmly, "you should stop." She snapped toward me, the smile gone. "You again? That's enough, Eleanor. I don't need another lecture. You think a few old papers mean you can throw me out?" I kept my eyes steady on her. "I don't need to throw anyone out, Melinda. You're the one walking yourself out." The kids, Ava and Leo, were standing at the bottom of the stairs, clinging to each other. Their eyes were wide, watching the adults. I turned to them, gave a gentle smile, and kept my voice light. "It's okay, you two. Grown-ups will handle this." Ava nodded and tugged her brother back to their room, but I could see her small hand shaking. Melinda stood there, breathing hard. Then she pulled out her phone, holding it up. "I'll call my lawyer. I'll prove you forged those documents, Eleanor. You'll regret this." I looked at her for a moment, then answered slowly, "Maybe. But I don't live on threats, Melinda. I live on the truth, and the truth can't be twisted forever." She glared at me, then turned to David. "You'll regret siding with her." David didn't look at her. He just said quietly, his voice breaking, "I already regret not protecting my mother sooner." That sentence silenced the whole house. For a few seconds I could hear the wind hissing. Sable bit her lip, then screamed, her voice raw. "You'll both pay for this. I'm not going anywhere. This is my house." I turned away and pulled my phone from my pocket. "Marcus," I said when he picked up, "activate the asset protection and change every lock today. I'll have Miss Hart escorted out." I hung up and looked straight at Melinda. "You have 15 minutes to pack. After that, the locks are changed." She stared at me, then let out a bitter laugh. "You think you've won, Eleanor? You'll be alone. You've lived your whole life in your husband's shadow." I shook my head. "No, Melinda. I've learned how to live without anyone's pity." She threw her purse to the floor and strode toward the stairs, each step a sharp ring. A few minutes later, she dragged a suitcase down, the wheels banging against the steps. David watched, saying nothing. She passed him, paused, then said coldly, "You'll miss me, but by then it'll be too late." No one answered. The door opened and slammed shut. Her car engine roared, then faded down the drive. I stood still, looking out the window. The white Lexus slipped away under the gray sky. The house fell quiet. A strange kind of quiet. Not suffocating, just relief. I turned to David. He stood against the wall, his shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said softly. I walked over and put a hand on my son's shoulder. "No need to say anything. Just start over. Every wound can heal, David, if you let it." He nodded, fighting tears, then sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. A stifled sob escaped. I went to get Arthur's old blanket, a deep blue wool throw. I laid it over David's shoulders. "Your father used to say," I whispered, "a strong man isn't one who never falls. It's the one who stands back up and isn't ashamed to cry." David looked up, his eyes shining. He nodded and murmured, "Thank you, Mom." I walked toward the stairs. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall, where I'd slept with Arthur for 45 years. I opened the door. The room still carried a faint scent of cedar and lavender. Everything was where it had always been. The silk drapes, the wedding photo, the armchair where Arthur read the paper. I moved slowly around the room, touching each thing, as if taking back pieces of my soul. This room had once meant peace, then became off-limits. Now I was back. I changed the lock, then opened the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. Pale moonlight fell over the oaks in the yard. A cool breeze drifted in. I drew a deep breath and felt a simple freedom. That night, I lay in the old bed, listening to the clock. Downstairs, I could still hear David's quiet sobs, but they faded. Ava and Leo were asleep. I closed my eyes. In my thoughts, I saw Arthur sitting at the edge of the bed, wearing his kind smile. "You did well, Ellie," he said in my memory. "You stood up at the right time." A tear fell, but it was a tear of peace. For the first time in months, the Hayes house was truly quiet. No high heels, no snide remarks, just the stillness of someone returning to herself. I whispered to the dark, "Welcome back, Eleanor. This is your home." And that night, I slept soundly, truly soundly. A week later, Atlanta was sunny. Harsh light pierced the living room window. I was rereading the investment reports when the doorbell rang. A long, decisive ring. I didn't rush. From my seat, I peeked through the curtain. Melinda. And beside her, a man in a gray suit. Julian Vance. I smiled slightly. I opened the door. Melinda gave a stiff smile. Julian bowed his head, his voice smooth. "Mrs. Hayes, we're here to talk civilly." I quietly stepped aside. In my mind, every piece was already placed. Melinda sat on the sofa, her posture taut. Julian sat next to her. I looked at them. "Get to the point." Melinda took a breath. "Eleanor, we're all adults. I just think if you truly care about Ava and Leo, you should consider a settlement." I raised an eyebrow. "A settlement?" Julian opened his briefcase. You have substantial assets, he said. We're only asking for a small amount. $3 million, call it support to stabilize things for the kids. I laughed, short and sharp. $3 million to stabilize. Melinda jumped in. You have more than enough. Arthur left $21 million. We're asking for a small portion for Ava and Leo. You can't take everything. You're not young anymore. I leaned back. And if I say no? Julian gave a polite smile. Then we'll have to go the legal route. I know people at the courthouse. At your age, a few light evaluations, and they could rule you incompetent. Control of the assets would shift to a guardian, maybe your son. I didn't move. Melinda added, her eyes flashing. Can you picture Ava and Leo testifying? Kids are honest, Eleanor. Once they say you forgot their names, the court will believe it. I stayed still. Then I rose slowly and walked to the wooden cabinet. I opened the third drawer and took out a black folder. I thought I'd let things pass peacefully. Turns out some people don't understand where to stop. I set the folder on the table. On the cover, Vance, Julian, personal debt record. Julian frowned. What is this? I opened it, revealing statements, bank logs, and betting slips. I know you owe $200,000 to a Dallas casino, and I know you forged a partner's signature in a small Austin real estate deal. I have full copies. His face shifted from calm to panic. He swallowed. Are you threatening me? No, I said, smooth as silk. I'm telling you that if I file, you lose your license. And when that happens, don't expect anyone to hire a broker tied to fraud and gambling. Melinda turned to Julian, her face pale. Julian, say something. But he only stammered. She can't know, I cut in. I know more than you think, and not just about you. I turned to Melinda, my gaze calm. As for you, Melinda, if I send this video to the court, you won't just lose your reputation, you'll lose custody. I opened my laptop. The screen lit up with the footage from the Sovereign. Melinda laughing, touching Julian's lapel, then signing a document. She exhaled, choking. No, you can't. I can, and I will if you stay here one more minute. The living room fell silent. The wall clocks tick, tick, tick. Julian collapsed into the chair, his hand over his face. Melinda shook, tears starting to fall. You're being cruel, she said, her voice breaking. I just wanted to take care of my kids. I looked at her. Take care of them? You left Ava to sleep alone for 2 nights because you were busy at a hotel with him. I have camera footage. You chose what mattered most, Melinda. And it wasn't your children. She sank onto the sofa, hands over her face, sobbing. Julian looked up, his voice ragged. What do you want? I answered simply. Nothing. Just for you to leave. I walked to the door and unlocked it. Get out of my house, I said slowly. Right now. Julian stood first, shoulders shaking. Melinda stayed seated, tears running. Eleanor, she choked. You'll regret throwing out the mother of your grandchildren. I looked at her, not with hatred, but with a calm, tired resolve. I'm just choosing to protect what I should have protected long ago. She lowered her head. Julian took her hand and helped her up. They walked slowly to the door. At the threshold, Melinda looked back one last time. I said nothing. The door closed with a dry click. That sound echoed. I stood still in the living room. Sunlight slid across the floor. I felt my shoulders grow lighter. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and took it out to the porch. The air was still. Children's laughter drifted from afar. Ava and Leo playing in the backyard. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the sun sink in. When I opened them, I smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of release. I knew the final battle was over. And this time, I didn't just keep my house. I kept myself. 3 days after, I got a call from Marcus Pierce. His voice was low but firm. "Eleanor, everything's ready," he said. "I just filed for protective orders and a restraining order. Melinda and Julian Vance won't be able to come near you or any member of your family for 2 years. If they violate it, the police will handle it." I sat on the porch, looking at the oak trees. The peace felt strange. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "I don't want to see them ever again." Marcus chuckled. "And you won't have to. The law can be slow, but when it moves, it's powerful." That afternoon, David went to the law office to sign the official divorce papers. When he came back, he sat at the dining table, his eyes tired but brighter. "It's done, Mom," he said hoarsely. "I submitted all the evidence, the emails, the video, the threats. The attorney says this will move fast. Melinda has nowhere left to turn." I nodded. He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You know, the hardest part isn't the divorce. It's facing the truth that I let you endure it alone all that time." I looked at my son, a 38-year-old man, his hair beginning to gray. I laid my hand on his. "You faced it, David. That's the first step to healing. Don't keep punishing yourself. Everyone has to learn to say, 'I'm sorry,' and then live it." He bowed his head, gripping my hand. The next week, the Atlanta Press began to report on it. Real estate broker Julian Vance investigated for financial fraud. The article was long, with a photo of him leaving the courthouse. Another paper ran a subhead. "Source reveals whistleblower is widow of late businessman Arthur Hayes." I folded the paper. I wasn't seeking attention. I just wanted justice to be seen. Marcus called that afternoon. "The investigation is widening. The Dallas casino confirmed Julian Vance owes exactly $200,000. Police are reviewing potential fraud charges." I answered simply, "Good. There's no joy in watching someone fall, but there is a quiet relief when the truth is put back where it belongs." In the days that followed, the Hayes house settled. Ava and Leo still went to school, but I noticed something different. They no longer looked at me with hesitation. There was warmth. One afternoon, Ava asked, "Grandma, why do you and Dad talk so much?" I smiled. "Because sometimes grown-ups have to relearn how to talk like kids. Honestly." She nodded, then whispered, "I like it when you tell the truth. My old mom used to say things that weren't true." I hugged her, my heart softening. I knew their scars would remain, but I also knew I could help them tell the difference between real love and exploitation. A few weeks later, Marcus and I sat in his office. On the table was a new file, cream-colored. Hayes Foundation Scholarship and Educational Trust. Marcus slid it toward me. "Everything's in order. You can start the scholarship program for Ava, Leo, and other children." I picked up Arthur's fountain pen and signed beneath the word, "Founder." As the ink soaked in, I felt something complete. I said quietly, "He would be proud, wouldn't he?" Marcus smiled. "I believe so. Arthur used to say, 'Ellie doesn't just preserve assets, she plants value.'" I left the office feeling light. David began therapy. At first, he resisted, but slowly I saw him change. He spoke more slowly, listened more. One evening, he stood outside my door. "Mom, I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up on me." I opened the door. "I had no reason to. Just remember, forgiving isn't forgetting. It's stopping the past from running your life." He nodded, then smiled, gentle as when he was a boy. I also decided to hire a new housekeeper, Estelle, a kind woman in her 50s. When she asked, "Do you want me to clean the downstairs room too?" I answered, "No, leave it as is. I want that room empty. It's a reminder that I was pushed down." And I walked back up. Estelle just nodded. The house began to bloom. Every morning, the smell of baked goods drifted through, blending with the sound of Ava and Leo laughing. I no longer felt like the maid. I was the true mistress of the house, and a woman who had reclaimed her dignity. That night, I sat alone in Arthur's study. On the desk was the old wooden box he left me. I opened it and took out a yellowed letter. "You'll be free if you wait until you're truly clear-headed. Don't strike back in anger, Ellie. Only when you see everything clearly will you truly win." I sat quietly, reading the lines. Outside, a light wind carried a few oak leaves across the porch. I said softly, as if Arthur were still right there, "I waited, Arthur." And I did it. Then I smiled. The smile of someone who survived, woke up, and finally became free. 3 months after things settled, I packed my bags. I simply told David, "Son, I need a few months to set things straight, in my head and in my heart." He understood. "Go, Mom. Call me when you feel at peace." The flight to St. Lucia took nearly 4 hours. From the plane window, the ocean unfurled, so blue I had to blink. Arthur used to say, "If there's a place on earth where time stops for me, it's Azure Bay." Now I was returning there. Azure Bay Villa, the home he bought for our 40th anniversary. The taxi stopped. The sea ahead looked like a sheet of blue silk. The villa, tucked among tall palms, white walls, red tile roof. When I stepped inside, the scent of salt mixed with familiar old wood. I threw open the main windows. The sea wind rushed in, billowing the white curtains. Light flooded the room, illuminating each piece Arthur had chosen. A hand-painted canvas, an oak rocking chair, our wedding photo smiling. I stood there a long time, then whispered, "I'm home, Arthur." On my first afternoon in St. Lucia, I walked the beach. The sand was powder soft, the water turquoise. Ripples lapped at my ankles. I slipped off my sandals and let the sea rinse away the dust of hard years. I did feel lighter. The next day, I hired a local couple, Maria and Matteo, to care for the villa. Maria was petite, her eyes gentle. Matteo was quiet, his hands meticulous. As I showed them around, Maria smiled. "This house has a soul, Señora. It feels like it's been waiting." I smiled. Maybe that someone is me. From that day, the villa wasn't empty. Each morning, Maria opened the windows, and Matteo trimmed the garden. Wind, waves, and the smell of coffee blended. I settled into a new rhythm. At 6 a.m., I walked the shoreline. The waves beat steady. Each footprint I left was erased, a reminder that the past can't be held. I often sat on a rock and watched the sun lift from the horizon. In the vast sound of the sea, I could almost hear someone whisper, "You're okay now, Ellie. Finally." At noon, I went to the local hospital where volunteers help tourists. They needed an English speaker. I signed up. I helped an elderly woman find her medication, comforted a young man with a broken leg, and chatted with lost visitors. A young nurse told me, "Señora Hayes, you bring a sense of peace." I smiled. Maybe because I've weathered a lot. Those who've known storms learn to speak softly. In the evenings, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset. The sky shifted from gold to pink to violet. Lights from boats flickered. That's when David usually called. Every Sunday, his face showed on the screen. Behind him, Ava and Leo jostled. "Grandma, I got an A in history. Grandma, I got the lead in the school play." I listened, smiling. David looked at me. "You seem happier than ever, Mom." I answered, "Maybe because I'm not afraid anymore. Only when fear is gone do we really live." Sometimes I sent money from the Hayes Foundation to help pay tuition for children in town. Maria helped me choose families. Each time I signed a transfer, I remembered Arthur's words. "Money is just a tool, Ellie. The real value is how you use it." David changed too. He learned how to share with his kids. On our calls, he no longer avoided my eyes. Ava and Leo grew wiser. They told me that every night, David read them Arthur's letters, as a way to show them how their grandpa had loved this family. In the third month, I hosted a small dinner. Maria made grilled fish, and Mateo picked an old bottle of red wine Arthur had left. I put on soft music. The sound of the waves blended with the wine's aroma and our laughter. I raised my glass. Thank you for being here, for helping this house come back to life. Maria smiled. No, Señora. You're the one who warmed this place up. That night, I walked the house alone. High ceilings, white walls, moonlight on the wood floor. The whole space was still. I stepped onto the balcony and looked at the sea. I leaned on the railing, inhaled the salty air, and felt peace mixed with gratitude. Before going to bed, I didn't lock the door. Not because I was careless, but because I didn't need to defend myself anymore. No more threats, no more fear. Under this roof, I lay down, the blanket pulled up. The window cracked. Outside, the waves lapped gently, a steady rhythm, like Arthur's heart. I closed my eyes and whispered, I'm still a mother, a grandmother, and a free woman. Finally. And for the first time in years, I slept soundly without locking the door. And I had forgiven myself. Mornings at Azure Bay always start with the sound of the waves. I usually make a cup of tea, take it out to the porch, and watch the sun climb over the sea. The first light is pale gold, shining on the wedding photo of Arthur and me. One morning, Ava sat beside me. She'd grown taller. She stayed quiet, then asked, Grandma, are you still mad at Mom? I set my tea down and looked at the water. No, I said. I'm not mad, but I haven't forgotten. Ava tilted her head. What does not forgetting mean? I smiled. It means remembering so we don't get lost again, sweetheart. Some wounds don't need ointment. They just need us to stop touching them. She nodded, then rested her head on my shoulder. A few weeks later, David brought the kids to visit. He looked healthier. At lunch, I took out a thick envelope. David, these are the papers transferring the Atlanta house, I said. That home is yours now, along with a fund to maintain it until Ava and Leo are grown. He looked up, stunned. Mom, no, that's your house. I shook my head, my voice light. No, son, your father wanted you to learn to stand on your own. You've done that now. I don't need that house to feel safe anymore. He was quiet, then stood and hugged me tight. I heard him whisper, I promise I won't let you and Dad down again. That afternoon, Ava and Leo sat in the kitchen with me. I taught Ava how to keep a journal. You don't have to write well, I said. Just be honest. Some things can't be spoken, but when you write them down, they get lighter. Ava smiled and wrote her first line. Today, Grandma taught me to write about feelings instead of being scared of them. Leo, who loves the stove, wanted to cook. He asked, Grandma, why is cooking so important? I said, because it's the simplest way to show love. People who cook learn to wait, to care, to listen. He nodded, then burned the first pancake. I laughed, and he blushed. By late afternoon, Ava taught me how to use TikTok. Grandma, don't tap the ads. I pretended to be serious. So, I'm modern now, huh? Both kids burst out laughing. Grandma, you're more trending than our mom, Leo said, and I laughed until tears came. But there were quiet afternoons, too. When the kids had gone back to Atlanta, I stayed alone. The waves still broke, but something in me had grown lighter. That evening, I checked my phone. A text from an unknown number. Eleanor, I'm sorry for everything. The sender's name, Melinda. I stared at the screen. My finger paused over reply. Then I quietly deleted the message. Not out of anger, but because I no longer cared. Some apologies arrived too late. Late that night, I sat in Arthur's study. In the drawer were a few blank sheets and his favorite black fountain pen. I took it out and began to write. Arthur, I kept what you left me, my dignity. It took me years to learn that winning isn't revenge. It's standing up without losing your kindness. David has learned how to love again, and Ava and Leo are growing in the light. As for me, I'm not angry at anyone anymore, not even myself. Azure Bay is a place of peace now. Thank you for believing I was strong enough to walk this road. I folded the letter and placed it in the nightstand drawer, right beside our wedding photo. In the picture, I'm smiling, and Arthur is looking at me with that gentle gaze. That night, I opened the window. Waves pulsed. I sat on the bed, my hand resting on the drawer. Inside me, there was no more emptiness, only the stillness of someone who crossed a storm. I think I'm the one who was brought back to life here. Off the coast, waves kept breaking, fading like thousands of tiny needles stitching the tears in my heart closed. The needles of time, forgiveness, and love. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Arthur, I've mended my life." And for the first time, sleep came as softly as a breath, peaceful, warm, and whole. The next morning, the sky was clear. Sunlight poured through the window and lit our wedding photo. I touched the cool glass and looked at his smile. I stepped onto the porch. The sea stretched blue, the wind carried salt, and the scent of jasmine. Everything at Azure Bay Villa was the same. But I wasn't. I was no longer the woman trembling after being pushed to the lowest floor of her own home. I was the woman who stood up, quiet and steady, and took back the right to live with dignity. At noon, David called. Ava and Leo squeezed into the frame, laughing. "Grandma, we grew tomatoes. They're almost as tall as me." I laughed and said, "Good. Everything beautiful starts with planting." David looked at me, his smile warm. "I think you planted the most precious thing. Self-respect and love." I said, "No, your dad planted it. I just tended the soil." In the afternoon, I walked the beach, leaving footprints and watching the waves erase them. Life is like that. Old wounds fade, and lessons remain. I stopped by the big rock where I like to watch the sunset and murmured, "Arthur, do you see? I did it." The sun sank. From a distance, Maria called, "Senora Eleanor, dinner is almost ready." I turned back, smiling, feeling as if I just closed a long book. Night fell, and I wrote the last lines in my journal. I lost what I thought I could never get back: trust, respect, family. But in losing, I found myself. Some victories don't roar. They're just a regular woman learning to laugh again after the storm. I closed the journal and set it on the table. Outside, the waves kept answering, beat after beat, like Arthur's reply, like the breath of a new life. I turned off the light, cracked the window. Moonlight washed the room in soft silver. I closed my eyes, knowing that tomorrow morning I'll step onto the porch, pour a cup of tea, and smile at the sunrise, like a promise to myself that I'll live, love, and keep telling my story with peace. If you're hearing this from anywhere in the world, tell me, where are you listening from? My life may be different, but our feelings are the same. We've all been hurt, and we all long to be loved the right way. Leave a comment and tell me how you've healed a hurt with kindness. And if you believe, like I do, that kindness is still the strongest power we have, please like, subscribe, and stay for the next stories. Thank you truly for listening all the way to the end. Because if someone out there hears this journey, then I know every wound is worth healing.